Hello and welcome to week 3 of Becoming a Good News Church. I don't know about you, but I've been finding it really interesting seeing the way in which this series has progressed. And over the past 2 weeks, we've begun to ask some pretty hard questions for us as a church. If you remember the first week, we asked the question of what are people's priorities? What is it that drives people around us? And then last week we asked the question as to, why do we even do evangelism? Why do we try and share the good news? And if you remember last week, Mark used the illustration of Robin Hood, the idea that God's kingdom is both here and now, but it's also not quite yet as we await the coming of Jesus Christ. And if we were to talk about the kingdom of God, we would be here for quite some time. It's quite a significant theological issue. But this week we're going to begin to develop a little bit more about what it means to be part of the kingdom of God.
In this third chapter of Graham Tomlin's book, The Provocative Church, he uses the temple as an illustration for one of the points that he wants to make about the kingdom of God. And looking back into history and the way the temple worked, and the way the temple worked when Jesus was on earth, was that sense of people could get access to certain parts of it. So if you're a Gentile, you were around the edge. If you're a woman, you could get one step closer to the middle. If you're an Israelite, you could get closer still. And if you were a priest, you got pretty close to the middle of the action in the temple. And just once a year, one priest would be allowed into the place known as the Holy of Holies, the place where God was meant to be present. So the question that Graham is putting before us is, how do people access the kingdom of God? And this picture of the place where God is worshipped, the place where God is king, where Jesus is Lord, must be the centre of the kingdom of God, and yet certain people couldn't get close to it. In the New Testament, there are places where Jesus heals someone and then sends them to the priest to say, go and show them you're healed, because that would get them access further in to the religious things of the day. And that's the kind of question that we're being left with. How do people feel when they come into a church with what they've already experienced in life and what they're perhaps hoping to encounter as they come through the door?
So the temple, from what we know, was quite an exclusive place with different areas for different people and different points which they can access and other points they weren't. So it was quite exclusive. And one of the things that Jesus was keen to stress was that this wasn't right. He labels the temple a den of thieves. That's not because of the money changing that was going on within the temple, but because of the fact that people were stealing people's opportunity to go and meet with God. And I think there is a real danger that as churches, we can do something very, very similar. There's an artist by the name of Hosier who released a single a couple of years ago called Take Me to Church. And it's interesting, when you look at Spotify, you can look at all the different times songs have been downloaded. So, for example, you take a popular song by Pharrell Williams, a song called Happy, and that's been downloaded something like 300 million times, quite a lot of times. This song by Hosier has been downloaded 600 million times. And what I find really sad about it is the sentiment about this song is really negative about this person's experience of church. One of the lines within the song says, I'll tell you my sins and you can sharpen your knife. And I think, sadly, that is people's experience at times of church. That it's a place of judgment, a place where they feel unworthy, and a feeling of sense of inadequacy. And that's exactly what Jesus is rallying against. The temple, the church, is meant to be an inclusive place where all are welcome, regardless of your sin, because we are all ultimately sinners, trying to become a priesthood of saints.
As Doug and I are putting this video and other material together, it happens that today is the 20th of January, the inauguration of Donald Trump to the President of the United States of America. If you're into all the conspiracy stuff and you're watching this video, it means the world hasn't ended just yet. But there's also all that talk, isn't there, about Brexit and what it means for us as a country, and that sense of keeping people out and keeping our borders tight and all of those kind of things. Let me tell you my story and see if that helps you to get it. You see, I arrived in Britain in 1965. Didn't speak a word of the language. I didn't even bother to try and learn the language for about a year, and then just a few words came. Before long, I'd got a handle on the language and was beginning to work that out. The truth is, I drew benefits from the day I arrived. Each month, some money would arrive in an account. I didn't look for a job straight away. I didn't get a job till I was 18 years old. But I came to Britain, and Britain was my home. I heard someone put it this way: the good thing for me was my parents were English, so I kind of knew where I belonged, I kind of knew how I belonged. I always felt like an insider rather than an outsider.
It seems to my mind that so much about us is wrapped up in a sense of identity. It's something that we keep coming back to throughout these sessions of, what are people's priorities? How do people identify themselves? And one of the things about Jesus, he's often identified as being king and as being Lord, and that immediately conjures up certain images within our mind as to what that might mean. And then for many, actually, Jesus being king is an uncomfortable image. It's one of authority and things like that. But when we become Christians, Jesus is king, and ultimately his kingdom comes ever nearer when he is part of our lives. And so the challenge for us as Christians is, how do we then express that to those around us? How do we invite them? How do we include them in God's kingdom?
Doug and I are interested in the questions that Graham Tomlin asked at the end of the third chapter. And if you look at question 4, he asks a question where we define ourselves by what we are not, and make some suggestions of things that we might want to intentionally avoid or intentionally put aside because Jesus is Lord, because the kingdom of God is near, because Jesus is coming. We'd like you to explore another question further than that. Are there things that we should be about, values that we should hold on a Sunday by Sunday, yes, but also all the other days of the week when we would meet together, maybe even in your small group, your circle of friends, that sense of what is it that we should be doing as well as what we should not.